Beholding the beauty of the Lord is a series of reflections and investigations into God's presence through the sanctuary. This is something we've been coming back to periodically, and it's been some time because of the pressing needs of other areas to address. We have looked at Psalm 27 as that scriptural platform serving for this series of studies and reflections. Psalm 27:4, David writes, "One thing I have desired of the Lord, and that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." Why? To behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. Now, we've looked at this in quite a bit of detail in Sabbaths past, but just as a refresher, beholding the beauty of the Lord, dwelling in his house, means to be in the intellectual, spiritual, emotional presence of God. Is it connected to a specific location? Yes, but first and foremost, it is a mental, spiritual, and emotional connection and dwelling. The beauty of the Lord. Beauty, something that we are moved by because of its attraction, its loveliness. We experience a sense of pleasure and satisfaction. And inquiring in his temple, meaning to engage in a detailed investigation of the evidence of the matter. I have come to appreciate anew, as no one gets more out of these messages than I do, because of the amount of time in reflecting, studying, sifting. And I trust that you are receiving some of the benefit of this investigation as well. Today, our focus, God's sanctuary, the dwelling of our heart's desire. Echoing what we find in Psalm 27, we read this and can sense the passion from Psalm 84. "How lovely is your tabernacle, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God, because better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness." What passion is expressed in these Psalms. We find it then troubling and intriguing to recognize the reality that this is not always the case. It wasn't back in the biblical era, and neither is it today. From that internet platform, Smart and Relentless, which describes itself as a dynamic faith-based media platform dedicated to inspiring, educating, and igniting ambitious minds in Christ. Its mission is to equip individuals not only to mentally and spiritually empower them, but to live purposeful lives driven by faith. That's the mission of Smart and Relentless, an internet ministry. Intriguingly, they ran this story not all that long ago. 10 former Christian leaders who walked away from faith. Now, some of you are aware of these happenings, and it seems so mismatched with what we just read from Psalm 27 and Psalm 84. This particular article identifies 10 Christian leaders who walked away from their faith. One is Joshua Harris. That name may be familiar to some, probably those of us who are a little bit older. Joshua Harris, a former pastor who authored the best-selling book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, a few years ago, which was widely used by Christian singles as a guide to building healthy relationships. But in 2019, Harris revealed on Instagram that he was getting a divorce from his wife of 21 years and no longer considered himself a Christian. Now, I would just intuit that at one time he could have echoed what we read in Psalm 27 as well as Psalm 84. He walked away. Another, Joseph Solomon, a poet and a musician with a large Christian following, recently announced his departure from Christianity. Responding to Christians who were in dismay, he said, "Whatever you believe, you have to own it. You can't lease it from anybody. You can't rent it. If you borrowed it from someone else, now is a good time to see what truly belongs to you." I would agree with that. You can't lease it. You can't rent it. You have to own it. Another YouTube platform, The Beat, with Alan Parr. Alan Parr has over 1 million subscribers. I have viewed a number of his videos. I don't agree with everything that he says, but he has some content which I think is valuable. He recently did a feature on Christian praise leader Audrey Assad, along with some others. But he focused initially upon Audrey Assad and the fact that she had walked away from her faith. Here's how he set up his comments about Audrey Assad.
So, not too long ago, I was on YouTube searching for one of my absolute favorite worship songs of all times, entitled Even Unto Death, performed originally by a young lady by the name of Audrey Assad. And if you're not familiar with it, here's a short clip of that worship song. And so, as the title of that song suggests, she is talking about how she is going to trust God even in the midst of life's most difficult circumstances, in the darkest hours, in humiliation. Ironically, it says, even unto death, I will love you. And then as I started scrolling a little bit more, I found this video right here where Audrey is explaining the reasons why she is no longer a Christian. And let me tell you guys, my heart just broke, because this song and this worship album that she produced called Inheritance, which, by the way, if you want to hear what it sounds like, the voice of an angel sounds like, then you need to listen to this entire album, because it's absolutely amazing. And my heart broke, because I'm sitting here thinking, how can someone sing these words and how can someone express their worship to God in one breath and then in the next breath say, I don't believe any of this. I'm not a Christian.
How can someone sing these words? Alan observes. How can someone sing these words, even unto death, in one breath, and then in the next breath say, I don't believe in this anymore? It happens. Life can be hard. Life can be draining. Life can be faith assaulting. Jesus recognized this. Remember the story that he told about the persistent widow who pressed her case to this judge. And at the end of that story, Jesus makes this observation. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Christianity Today observed back in 2022 that 26 million Americans stopped reading the Bible regularly during COVID-19. That's startling, isn't it? Our praise team sang just a few moments ago, now this gospel told of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom, I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ who has resurrected me, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of kings. Oh, that would be our song continually. But sometimes it isn't. From the New Testament era, Paul introduces us to an individual that we don't know a whole lot about. His name was Demas. In Colossians chapter 4, he makes this observation. Luke, the beloved physician, Luke, who wrote Luke and who also wrote the record of the Acts of the Apostles, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. So we are led to conclude that Demas was a companion with Paul, at least at this time, when he was writing this letter to the church in Colossae. But in the last document, recorded document that we have in the New Testament that Paul wrote, Paul makes this observation. Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and he has departed. He was full of faith at one time, but then something happened in which he walked away from that experience. This is not something new. Yes, we have seen those current examples, and they are just a slice of what we observe. We see it in the New Testament era. Looking back to the Old Testament era, in tension with Psalm 27 and Psalm 84, we look at Psalm 73. Truly, God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. This was written by a Levite named Asaph. He was a praise singer. And he's confessing, at times I have difficulty trying to make sense out of life. He goes on to observe, their strength is firm. They're not in trouble as others. They're not plagued like others. Pride serves as their necklace. Eyes bulge with abundance. They have more than their heart could wish. Always at ease. They increase in riches. And then he confesses, when I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. This is a real struggle at times. One that was occurring in yester millennium. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. Okay is another online platform. Ran this article not too long ago. No faith, no problem. The 21 most famous celebrity atheists. Here are a few. George Clooney grew up Catholic but did not stay with his Catholicism. Brad Pitt, his faith has wavered between atheism and agnosticism. Angelina Jolie, there doesn't need to be a God for me. Well, you know, if you've got plenty of money and you live in a nice place and you have fame and everything that goes with it, you can kind of see why she might say that. There doesn't need to be a God for me. Kathy Griffin is not considered just as an atheist, but rather as a militant atheist. And how about Morgan Freeman? He is quoted as saying, my opinion does not question the existence of God, merely how we arrived at the existence of God. Even though man invented God, God is still God. And I'm going, huh? So I have a question for you. If you're traveling down the highway and a boat passes you, how many pancakes does it take to fill a doghouse? True or false? It's absurd. You caught it. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. Until, Asaph writes, I went into the sanctuary of God, and then I understood. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, and then I understood. So much to unpack in that implication. But let's just review. The sanctuary was constructed so that the Lord could dwell with us and that we might be able to behold the beauty of his character. Let them make me a sanctuary, he instructed Moses and that generation at Sinai, that I may dwell among them. And in times past, we have seen that this was not the first reference to a sanctuary there in the wilderness between Egypt and Canaan. There's a heavenly sanctuary which is filled with praise and worship. That heavenly sanctuary serves as the capital of the universe. It is the seat of God's authority. And Moses was instructed, along with the entire community of Israel, to erect a pattern or a model in which a dwelling could take place, in which the issues of sin and forgiveness and atonement would be experienced. And in times past, we have seen that the foundation of that sanctuary service was with the whole burnt offering, or the daily burnt offering. This happened every day. In Hebrew, it is one of those continual aspects of ministry, the tamid, which happens every day. And that everyday whole burnt offering is a vivid portrayal of the daily dependence upon sacrifice as a means of God dwelling with us as a community and also with us individually. One Bible commentary makes this observation in regards to that whole burnt offering. The burnt offering operated under the assumption that human beings are not holy by nature. And consequently, when they approach the Lord, even to express gratitude, joy, and thanksgiving, they are in need of forgiveness. We have sung here this morning. We have prayed, and we are still entirely dependent upon the foundation of God's grace expressed through Jesus, the fulfillment of the whole burnt offering. Another aspect of the daily and the continual that we see in the sanctuary was the ministry of the high priest. All of the special clothing that was connected to his ministry. He bore the names of the sons of Israel on the breastplate of judgment over his heart as a memorial before the Lord continually. And we took a few moments in weeks past to recognize that this continual tells us that we have a God who is always there, 24/7, 365. But then we also looked at some other aspects of the sanctuary, the sin offering. Remember, the whole burnt offering was not required. It was an option for the worshiper to engage with. But the sin offering was mandatory. And in that sin offering, an individual or a family would come and they would lay their hand on the head of that animal, symbolically transferring their sin to that animal. Then that animal would be slain by the worshiper, and blood would be taken in various steps and applied to various aspects of the sanctuary. And the conclusion, so the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven. The function of the sin offering was to ransom the sinner, and its blood became the agent of transfer of the confessed sins into the sanctuary to await the cleansing on the day of atonement. So, day by day by day, sin is confessed, and it is transferred to the sanctuary. The daily sacrifices and services were an accumulation of the record of sin, we could say, into the sanctuary. But then one day a year, the Day of Atonement, 7th month, 10th day, there were unique, special worship actions that took place to cleanse the sanctuary. Day by day, sin was going into the sanctuary, but on the Day of Atonement, sin would be coming out of the sanctuary. There were multiple offerings that were offered: a bull for a sin offering for the priest himself, a ram for the burnt offering for the entire community, a goat for the sin offering for the sanctuary, and a goat acting as a transporter of sin out into the wilderness. So on the annual Day of Atonement, what had been coming into the sanctuary all year was now leaving the sanctuary symbolically on that one day. Here's just a few short verses that give us the description in Leviticus 16. Speaking of the priest, then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, bring its blood inside the veil, do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it on the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So shall he make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel and because of their transgressions and for all their sins. And so he shall do for the tabernacle of meeting which remains among them in the midst of their uncleanness. It was a very detailed order of actions that took place on this particular day. You need to read Leviticus 16 repeatedly in order to grasp the sequence and to begin to absorb its meaning. When he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Because there were two goats, one as a sin offering and then the live goat. Then the priest would actually take his hand and symbolically place it on the live goat, and that live goat would be taken out into the wilderness by the hand of a man. This live goat actually served as what we may say to be the tote goat. The live goat was the garbage truck shouldering the record of sin out into the wilderness. And the conclusion of Leviticus 16, down in verse 30 in that area, on that day, offerings of purification will be made for you, and you will be purified in the Lord's presence from all your sins. In other words, you will be cleansed. And so this is often understood as the cleansing of the sanctuary. And we have reviewed in a few seconds a very involved experience of a very intricate ritual, and we haven't even scratched the surface. Because if we did, I'm fearful that you would glaze over. So the question comes to mind, so what? Really, so what? Wasn't that just all about what happened in yester millennium? Stay with me. I don't think many of you have ever seen this before. So in the biblical literature, there is a literary device known as a chiasm, also referred to as chiastic structure. It is a literary device found in many ancient texts, including the Pentateuch, which refers to the 5 books of Moses, Pente referring to 5, where themes or ideas are mirrored or repeated in reverse order around a central focal point. Stay focused on this. In the case of the Pentateuch, scholars have identified Leviticus 16, which describes the rituals of the Day of Atonement, as the central point of a chiastic structure that extends across the entire 5 books of Moses. So let's look and see how this builds up. You can see the illustration on the graphic as a pyramid, meaning what goes up on the left side, A, B, C, D, E, will be echoed in some fashion on the right side. D prime, C prime, B prime, A prime. So let's just look at a bird's eye view of how the Pentateuch has a chiastic structure focusing in on the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. Think about what we read in Genesis. Genesis gives us the account of the creation of the world, of the human family. It also features to us the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants. In Deuteronomy, the other side of the pyramid, we have a recap of law and covenant and Moses' final message. But as the covenant was referred to in Genesis, it is echoed again now in Deuteronomy. Do you see the correlation, the balance between one side and the other? As we look at Exodus and Numbers, Exodus gives us the record of Israel in Egypt. It focuses on Moses' leadership. Don't want to be insulting to him. I just couldn't fit it on the slide, so we abbreviated his name to M.O. Focuses on Moses' leadership and their exiting out of Egypt. In Numbers, the focus is on the children of Israel in the wilderness and in Moses' leadership, along with preparation to enter the promised land. And at the top of the pyramid, the top of the chiasm, we have Leviticus with its laws and rituals for worship and daily life. So you can see how the pyramid comes up from both sides. Let's rerun that now again with just a few different descriptions. Genesis and Deuteronomy parallel each other as they both deal with the establishment of the covenant and the foundational narrative of the Israelites. It's just a general summarized statement to show us the relationship between Genesis and Deuteronomy. Exodus and Numbers parallel each other, focusing on the journey of the Israelites and the leadership of Moses. And then Leviticus. The central focal point in Leviticus, emphasizing atonement, the Holy Covenant, the relationship between God and his people. It actually explains in detail how God dwells with his people. So once again, we have the chiastic structure of coming up one side and then repeating down on the other. But let's look even more closely at Leviticus 16 itself. Leviticus 16. You can see the graphic there that talks about holy practices, both at the beginning of the chapter and at the end. It speaks about a holy priesthood and a holy people. But in the middle of Leviticus 16 are the worship actions of the Day of Atonement. Atonement so that you can be brought back into at one-ment with God. So you're still asking the question, so what? We've noted in this series that the earthly sanctuary was a pattern or a model of heavenly realities. So the so what leads us to leap into the New Testament now as the New Testament looks back on these Hebrew realities. Hebrews chapter 9. Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is, not of this earth. The reality of Jesus as the whole burnt offering, the reality of Jesus as the sin offering, the reality of Jesus as the goat for the people on the Day of Atonement that was slain, has a forward-looking action to the heavenly Day of Atonement. Not with the blood of goats and bulls, Hebrews goes on, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with the blood of another. He would then have to have suffered often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. That is the purpose of the sanctuary, coming into a dwelling experience with God in which sin is put away. And as it is appointed for men to die once, But after this, the judgment. So Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who are eagerly waiting for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. So what? So what? What does this have to do? If we look at what happened in the sanctuary in the wilderness, and we see the spiritual significance and reality for us today, we begin to wrap our arms around the so what when we realize that it was a solemn time. In that era, a day, but in our time, an era that extends beyond a single day. From Leviticus 23, we read this, which also speaks of the Day of Atonement. If there is any person who does not humble himself, that is, afflict his soul on this very day, he shall be cut off from his people. In the symbolic Day of Atonement, it was a time of spiritual humility and focus. And as we look at its fulfillment in a cosmic sense now, God is calling us to be humble before him and to focus on his ministry. So we go back to Asaph's confession in Psalm 73. Truly God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. And when I thought about how to understand this, it was too painful for me until I went into the sanctuary of God, and then I understood. So what happens to a praise singer who walks away from faith? Is it because of a lack of focus? I don't doubt for one moment, in my own experience and in yours as well, life is hard. It's draining. It can be faith assaulting. Little by little, we can stop reading the Bible. We lose our focus. But living in the real cosmic, universal Day of Atonement time frame, we are called to focus on that which eternally matters. Commenting on this generally, the book Great Controversy offers this observation: Satan invents unnumbered schemes to occupy our minds, that they may not dwell upon the very work with which we ought to be best acquainted. The arch deceiver hates the great truths that bring to view an atoning sacrifice and an all-powerful mediator. He knows that with him everything depends on his diverting minds from Jesus and his truth. You're sitting in church, and somebody right now is looking at their phone on Facebook. Somebody is not even dialed in, and you're sitting in church. What is it for you in your home? Have we become so addicted to our electronics that we cannot function without them? Parenthesis, umbrella of grace. I have received texts on my phone from some in our community who are sending out text messages during the worship service. I appeal to you to redirect your focus. Because if that is happening in the worship service, what is happening Sunday through Friday? Now, if there's a purpose that you need to text in order to bring attention to something that is important at that moment, okay. But texting stuff that can wait till later in the day? The sanctuary in heaven is the very center of Christ's work in behalf of men. It concerns every soul living upon the earth. It opens to view the plan of redemption, bringing us down to the very close of time and revealing the triumphant issue of the contest between righteousness and sin. A few moments ago, we noted that the counsel given in Leviticus 23, that if one did not humble herself, he or she would be cut off from the community. That sounds very harsh. But in reality, when we lose our spiritual connection, we are cutting ourselves off from what God is providing. This past week, I listened. I didn't read. I listened to 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings in my spare time. While I'm driving, while I'm doing yard work, while I'm lifting weights or sitting in the sauna, I'm listening. And really, the second half of 2nd Kings is a very sad recital of kings who did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. One after the other after the other. Kings who had lost their focus, who no longer valued the temple, did not value the God who wanted to dwell with them. Rather, they were engaged with pagan gods to the point that some of them were even sacrificing their own children. They, in essence, had cut themselves off because they had lost focus, lost connection. All of us are vulnerable. I am vulnerable. And our opportunity today is to renew our focus with that which really matters. Because when we're spiritually sane and in the moment, we do want to be with God and to dwell in His house and to behold His beauty forever. Christ is the connecting link between God and man. He has promised His personal intercession by employing His name. Oh, who can value this great mercy and love? He places us close by His side, encircling us with His human arm, while with His divine arm He grasps the throne of the infinite. My dear family, focus with me. Focus upon the privilege that we have to dwell in God's sanctuary, the dwelling of our heart's desires.